Welcome back to the SaaS Playbook, where we unpack the real stories behind founders and operators building in technology. Today's episode is brought to you by Hera Digital, helping founders build predictable sales engines and smarter revenue systems. Comment system and someone will reach out. In today's episode, we're joined by Matt Hamann. I'm so sorry if I butcher that, Matt. Founder of Llama Farm and co-founder of Rownd. Matt has spent his last several years building at the intersection of authentication, AI tooling, and developer infrastructure, navigating the long road from early product development to real product market validation. Today's conversation focuses on what it actually takes to build patiently in fast-moving categories and lessons most founders only understand in hindsight. Matt, welcome to the podcast. So we'd love to dive in a little bit into your journey and how you got to Llama Farm being your first baby to now Rownd. So please take the virtual microphone away.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. My startup journey is, fraught with twists and turns, and it maybe is a little bit different than some. Although I think a lot of founders, start out at a company and kind of learn the ropes, maybe a larger company. So for me, that was IBM. And I spent about a decade there before jumping into, more the entrepreneurship and startup world. And so after leaving IBM, my co-founders and I founded Rownd, and it actually started out as a data privacy company, and thinking that with the rise of GDPR in Europe and CCPA in California and privacy laws in Brazil and other places throughout the world, that this is really going to be like a big thing, a lot of money in this space. A lot of companies were going to need help securing their users and, really empowering their users to control that data. And as it turns out, all that regulation is, for as many hurdles as it put in front of companies, it didn't really matter. I'm not sure that we really garnered that much better privacy protection worldwide, even with these laws. They just don't seem to have a ton of teeth in them, other than perhaps keeping smaller players out of some of the market, but that's like a totally different topic. And so what we realized pretty quickly is that there wasn't a good business in the way that we were approaching it. And there we pivoted to authentication, which is really what Rownd has been for the past several years. And we built an authentication product that's kind of with the best of them. The Auth0s of the world, the Stitches of the world, Clerk, Okta. I'm pretty proud of what the team built. But, I think one of the mistakes that we made throughout that is not recognizing soon enough that there's just a lot of players in the market. It's a commoditized space, and it's really hard to gain a foothold in this day and age with where we are in terms of AI and just the way software is changing. And, when you've already got so many other players in the market, that really just impacts your ability to hit PMF in a meaningful way. We have some really great customers, and we're still operating the product because it's just such a great system. But, with the rise of AI, we've really recognized that we need to be helping others implement AI, and we need to really be building the tools for AI to be accessible to essentially anyone, whether they're using the cloud or whether they're using their laptop or they've got their own data center and that sort of thing. And so that's kind of where Llama Farm has come in.
So maybe I might have been mistaken. I thought you had started building Llama Farm first, but is it actually the other way around?
It's the other way around, yes.
Right. Okay, that's cool. So we have a very unique story, Matt. I think what you just said, the bigger boys like Okta, it's very similar to the travel industry, where this is essentially where I was from, a corporate travel industry, where the big guys are so big and the runway is so far ahead that there's almost no point trying to really make a big difference within that sort of very sub-vertical. But there is merit in understanding that maybe this is not for us, and understanding that nice and early rather than not knowing when to cut it off. But then you've invested so much time that you don't want to cut it off. So it's like this weird imbalance. So that's a big learning curve for me, but also it sounds like a big learning curve for you as well, Matt.
My co-founder often calls that the sunk cost fallacy, right? Where you've poured so much time into building a product, you don't want to let it go, even though the right thing to do might be to essentially cut it off and move on. And that could apply to anything, whether you're building software or something else.
You've been building this business around for 5 years now, I think, from our first conversation. But what has changed most in your thinking from year one to date?
When we first got into building a business, building a startup, you look at the world and you just see so many products out there. You see the successful ones for the most part, right? You see the ones that are growing and the ones that are household names, and you think, how hard can it be? Even though everyone tells you it's hard, you're like, no, look, I mean, they built the product. It works like this. I can build something similar, or I can copy some of the approaches that they took in building whatever I'm building. And I think it's really easy to see that. And then as you get into it, refined, and it takes a lot of iteration and a lot of pivoting. And I think a lot of founders get stuck on like, I had this idea and I think it's a good idea, but the market is actually telling them that it's not. They often will, and we did this too, right? We excused it as like, oh yeah, we added a customer or two last month or whatever, we are growing, but if you're not seeing the real traction and the real demand for your product, it's probably not going to go anywhere. And that's a really strong signal that you need to pivot into something else. And that's where I think, especially today with all the tools we have in space, even for writing software, you can pivot much faster and try things and see what sticks and what doesn't. So, don't spend months and years building something that, hasn't validated itself as a true market need, and just move on to the next thing. And it might be like it might be a pivot or a spin on what you have been working on, maybe just from a different angle, but it might be something else entirely, right?
Yeah. There's been a few guests on the podcast who've actually gone through a very similar experience where they've had to pivot almost between the period of Christmas and New Year. They had a bit of a break, and then they came back to office and had found that their competition had completely run off, right? And they're like, oh, we've sort of lost that market now. And so they completely pivoted, which when you think about how volatile the market is in terms of the speed in which it goes, I think that really determines not only that you can pivot quickly, but you can test really quickly, right? How do we then make sure and we can prove proof of concept before we actually start building the back end? And I think when it comes down to this is more to do with vibe coding, where they can really build that front end skin, go to market, see if there's an appetite for it, and then start to build. And I think we see that more and more on a daily basis now with so many tools. But what's your take on vibe coding, and what are your thoughts around the longevity of vibe coding?
Well, I think that we're squarely in the space where vibe coding is really not vibe coding anymore. It's just software engineering. And the actual software engineering practice has changed from the humans writing the code to the humans becoming the directors, the product engineers that are leveraging AI to write the code. I mean, I'll be honest, I haven't probably touched a line of code in the last 2 or 3 months because Claude Code has gotten so good at just taking, what I prompt and turning that into something that works. And it doesn't always get it right on the first time. In fact, it rarely gets everything right the first time. You have to go back, you have to iterate. Planning up front can help with that a lot. In fact, there's a tool that we at Rownd and Llama Farm use to help us with this. It's called OpenSpec, and it's a Claude Code plugin. And what it does is it helps you craft a plan and kind of explore an idea before it ever generates a line of code. And it turns that idea into a bunch of markdown, which really guides the agent, the Claude Code agent, to build that feature into the product, or even to bootstrap the product that you're working on. So we found that to be incredibly helpful. But I think, whereas last year we were talking about the rise of vibe coding and how you're just kind of like feeling it out, I really don't feel like it's vibe coding anymore. I just feel like it's become the software engineering practices, and the large language models understand enough what you're saying and what you're giving them in terms of data that they can build the thing that you want.
I do really see the value in being able to, one, pivot really quickly, but two, being able to deliver the final and complete product. And just as you said, reiterating, but reiterating in a way that it's customer focused. So we have that constant feedback loop. And I think that's a lot of an area that some founders that I've spoken to haven't really given a lot of thought, and hence having to redevelop very frequently. But going back to the early stages again, what were some of the subtle signs that you hadn't reached the true product market fit?
It definitely comes down to metrics. So what is the metric, the one metric you're tracking that's going to tell you whether you've hit product market fit? For most companies, it's revenue in the door. Open source is maybe a little different. How much traction are you getting in terms of stars or, external PRs or issues and things like that. But, for most like traditional companies that are trying to make it by generating revenue, by generating that growth, that's your metric, right? And so if you're not building that momentum in terms of revenue, and you're seeing those like multi-digit percentage jumps of growth month over month, then something is wrong, right? You should be seeing, big percentage jumps in revenue as you go. And if you're not like landing those sales calls, you don't have a decent pipeline of revenue flow, then there's something wrong.
And most founders use gross revenue as a KPI. But why do you think that most founders use that as a key metric to start off with?
Well, I mean, great question. As they say, money talks, right? Usually that's the metric that investors are looking for, right? So if you're out trying to raise a seed round, or especially a Series A, like you have to have the revenue metrics to support that. You can't get past a seed on an idea alone. You can raise a seed on an idea with some evidence that this is maybe a good product category, whether it's here's a few other players in this space and this is how we're differentiating, and investors can get excited about that. But if you can come to the table with actual, essentially cash coming in the door, that's a much stronger signal. You're going to have a much easier time raising money, and you're going to be much more successful in getting to those next stages.
In a diagnosis perspective, businesses or startups who are bootstrapping, where they're looking at revenue and they're looking for mass adoption, but there's no real underlying KPIs, what I call the important KPIs. What is the adoption? What is the implementation transfer rate? What is the sign-up rate? You then start to lose your focus. You then forget why you're building that product in the first place, because it's not really serving. It's just something new to the market. For founders building an AI right now, what's one trap you see people falling into that you've already experienced yourself?
That's a great question. And I'm going to go back to what you're saying about bootstrapping real quick. And I actually look at that maybe in a slightly different way. I mean, we're VC funded, VC backed, and I think that's really been enabling for us to, quit the day jobs, go full time, really explore the space, and try to drive the product forward and find that PMF. But the advantage that bootstrappers have is that the only thing that should matter for them is that revenue stream, because if they don't get the revenue, is a distraction. But that's definitely something to think about. I mean, if you're VC backed, you can get distracted there too with, well, I've got money in the bank, I've got time to explore this. And sometimes you're not hungry or desperate enough in that situation because you're a little too comfortable. So I think that's something to watch out for. But it could go both ways for sure.
There's definitely pros and cons. Most businesses start off bootstrapped, proof of concept, and then move to funding, providing they can prove a concept with good KPIs, right? Otherwise, there's no chance of fun discussions. It's been very interesting, especially just having guests on this podcast and see how they prefer to move forward with their business. When someone lands on Llama Farm for the first time, what do you hope they immediately understand, and where do you still see confusion?
The AI space is growing rapidly, every day. It's shifting, it's transforming. It seems like there's a new breakthrough every other month in some ways. We go from Claude 4.5 to 4.6, right? We go from Gemini 3 to Gemini 3.1. And what used to be a pretty minor update, with traditional software, it's just 3 to 3.1, ends up being, in some cases, a huge leap in terms of capability and what it can do. What we're trying to do at Llama Farm, and Llama Farm is totally open source. It will always be open source. Our goal is not to make money, directly from that. But we're trying to make AI accessible to anyone to run on their laptop. So maybe you don't have deep pockets, you can't afford to, pay the cloud bill to run the frontier models, and you, in a lot of cases, you don't need the frontier models, right? For even large language model inference or small language model inference, you can do a lot on some pretty commodity GPUs that aren't going to cost you an arm and a leg. Whether you're running it locally inside your house, on your laptop, whether you're putting that on a VPS in a data center, something that's less expensive than renting a H200, right? And so Llama Farm's goal is really to enable those hybrid applications where you can run the parts that make sense locally, and then you can delegate to the cloud for other things in a way that helps even less experienced developers who don't know a lot about AI get started, right? So that's the way we're looking at it. And so we're hoping that as people come to hit the Llama Farm website, or really we're hoping that they get to the GitHub repository that first of all, they're starting it to just help us kind of grow awareness about this. And we love to get more community contributions, more community involvement. That's a big goal for us in 2026. But we just hope they, kind of explore the documentation, download the project and build something cool.
I think once you've given people the tool, it's kind of the fisherman and the fish sort of scenario. If you've given them the tool, see what really comes and what magic you can really create once you've got that tool. And accessibility is a huge thing, obviously with the barrier of entry now being super low with AI. But I think what Llama Farm does really well is it provides anybody and everybody access, but not in a way where it feels low barrier, if that sort of makes sense at all.
Yeah. In fact, our target persona is those developers that are just kind of dipping their toe in the water, not even sure exactly what pieces they need, but they realize that they need AI to help them with a problem, not necessarily like a coding problem, but something that at runtime, I need to classify an image. I need to get some understanding of this text that my user just, pasted into a text box, right, on my web app, things like that. And there's a lot more beyond just large language model inference. There's a lot of stuff in machine learning, whether it's, vision, doing OCR or image classification, anomaly detection, and on and on. It is a really deep well that a lot of developers, especially the more junior ones, kind of drown in. And so we're really, helping to bridge that gap and try to, be the rising tide that lifts all boats. And, we know we're not there yet. We're still building the product or the project, and we're still, really trying to hone that user experience. But we need the community feedback. And we have a Reddit, a subreddit as well, specifically for Llama Farm. And we love getting community feedback in there, whether it's something that we've released or something that they've built and have, shared with us. It's always great to get that feedback.
Yeah, I will would love to grab that link from you as well, Matt. And then we could pop it down in the section below for people who want to check out that thread and see what you can really build with Llama Farm in your back pocket. And just sort of, and give Matt some feedback, guys. Give him something to work with to make the product better, to make it more of a fit for you and what you're building. So I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into Rownd as well. Where are you currently feeling the most friction in the business? Is it awareness, adoption, conversion, retention, or something else completely?
I think in a big part, it's awareness and just understanding the capabilities that we can provide. Llama Farm is the open source core, right? And then the AI arm of Rownd is really the enterprise, go-to-market side, right? And so that's where we're actually building a lot of the turnkey value-added solutions where I can buy something. Like if I'm a large enterprise, I can buy an AI solution off the shelf and it just works, or I can work with Rownd to customize it for my needs. So for example, if you're a company that does a lot of proposal writing and you're constantly writing proposals for government agencies or other companies, different things like that, that might be a place where you could use AI. But a lot of times those types of companies don't want to use the cloud because there's privacy concerns there and data concerns. So they could actually run some of that locally using a Rownd solution powered by Llama Farm. And that's something that we could help them with and really giving them that turnkey solution that brings all the AI power in a very accessible and easy to use package where they control where that data lives and where it goes and how it's used.
Totally safety and making sure that data is protected. Do you foresee that in that example, being able to fill out tenders or at least release tenders in a very safe and localized way where you can control where the data lives and is stored? Where do you sort of foresee in terms of industry where that would really excel?
I think anyone dealing with public services, especially governments, will really benefit from those types of solutions. And I think they're still finding their way in a lot of cases. How exactly can I use AI in this business? And, I guarantee you a lot of the folks on the front lines are just plugging things into ChatGPT and taking the results and then plugging them back into, a Word document or a content management system or something like that. So there's probably a bunch of data leakage going on right there already. Just similar to, shadow IT, where you don't know what apps your employees are using, right? You don't know what AI your employees are using. And so if companies that are really in those sectors can empower their employees to use best-in-class tools that have AI built in, their employees are going to be happier. They're going to get better deals. They can ensure that the outputs from these systems are complying with the RFPs they're responding to. And you can really even benefit from the RFP writer side, right? I'm trying to write an RFP. I want to make sure it is clear about what the requirements of the project are. And again, a lot of these are governments or other public sectors or big enterprises, manufacturing and healthcare and things like that. And this type of AI could be very beneficial for those industries as well, where it's just like there's a lot of regulation or a lot of specificity and structure around what they're doing, and the right AI can really help them produce a better deliverable.
I think the RFP space is a whole beast in its own entirely. I think what it really screams out to me particularly is actually the data being safely kept and well managed without it having to go to a cloud, or at least prior to going to a cloud, right? So it gives them a bit of a taste as to what they might feel like. And the reason why I ask about the industry is the healthcare industry in Australia is heavily regulated. It's almost like Fort Knox. You can barely get in as a startup, right? And that's mainly to do with privacy and patient data management. And that's totally fine, right? I'm happy that we are strict about it. But I'm sort of thinking in terms of having something like Rownd and Llama Farm would help those small businesses make a better pitch towards actually engaging with that field, and then really giving them an upside and an advantage against some of the regular suppliers within the space. So that's something I would love to explore a bit more within Australia.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, whether it's a Rownd, turnkey solution or it's another company that's building on top of Llama Farm, I can't wait to see, how this technology will be able to change those industries. I think it'll really help all of us.
Last question for you, Matt, before we close off the podcast and your episode. As you think about scaling this over the next 12 months, whether that is either side, either Rownd or Llama Farm or concurrently, what feels most uncertain right now and what feels most predictable?
Well, the thing that is most uncertain is where are we headed in the world of AI solutions? And there's so many new entrants in the market. There's so many existing players in the market that are pivoting. You never know like who's going to pop up tomorrow. Thing is going to show up that's going to, potentially change your perspective or eat your current revenue stream, right? I think AI is changing the world just how software changed the world, over the past couple decades. And, that's kind of something that everyone has been saying, right? And it's, doesn't make it any less true. So I think that's the biggest unknown is just, how far can we go and how fast are we going to get there? And, will the pace of innovation change? Is it really going to change the structure of companies and software and businesses? And I think it's going to be very empowering, but we're definitely going to go through a period of uncertainty where, as we've seen in the stock market lately, right? Companies' valuation can just drop dramatically overnight because of one report of AI doing something very well that company is well versed in, right? So, whether that's warranted or not, I think remains to be seen. But there's definitely, you can see that there's fear out there, right? So fear and uncertainty create opportunities. And I think I'm really excited about just all the opportunities that are arising because we can do so much more and we have so much more power at our fingertips. And it's just really exciting to wake up every morning and think, what can I build today? The possibilities are endless.
That for me, it presents more of a problem than a solution, because I would just go out and build 100 things and not actually use any of them. So this is why I never became a developer, Matt, because I can't keep to one thing.
The first half of that might actually be a good thing.
Matt, thank you again for taking the time and sharing your perspective, especially around building over multiple years in categories that evolve as quickly as AI and infrastructure. For anyone building in developer tooling, authentication, or applied AI, Matt's journey offers a grounded look at what long-term execution really requires. We'll include Matt's details in the show notes below if you'd like to follow him on Llama Farm or at Rownd and what they're building next, but also the Reddit thread where we can explore what other people are building using his tools. So thank you, Matt, for joining us, but keep building meaningfully.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.